Hey sis, why didn't you come to mom's funeral? What? I was shocked by the sudden phone call from my sister. I can't believe you didn't come to our own mother's funeral. That's so cold-hearted. How could you do that? It's just awful. No decent person would act like that. I was confused because our mom had already passed away 3 years ago and we had a proper funeral back then. I had no idea what my sister was talking about. I'm married with kids now. My husband and I both work, but we make sure to give our kids lots of love so they don't feel lonely. My husband helps with housework and taking care of the kids, and I'm proud of our family. I want to make sure my kids don't go through what I did. My parents got divorced when I was in elementary school because my mom had an affair. My dad found out because I told him. Even though people usually think kids will side with their mom, that wasn't true for me. My mom wasn't the loving figure everyone expects. I don't have any memories of her showing me love. I have a younger sister, but our mother only paid attention to her. It felt like even doing housework was too much trouble for my mom, so all of it was left to me. Actually, it was more like she forced it on me. After I told my dad about her affair, my mom hated me even more. She blamed me constantly, leaving me with emotional and physical scars. When the divorce happened, she took my sister and left. Thanks to my dad and grandparents, I was still able to see my sister regularly. But when I got to middle school, we started seeing each other less. I thought it was just an adult issue, but it turned out my sister was avoiding me. After being turned down a few times, I asked her if I had done something to upset her. She told me that our mom blamed me for breaking up the family and convinced her that I was a traitor. My sister said if she kept seeing a traitor like me, she might get abandoned too. She couldn't handle sneaking around to see me anymore and wanted me to stop contacting her. I tried to explain that it was our mom who betrayed us by having the affair that broke up the family. My sister knew about the affair, but because I was the one who told our dad, she still saw me as the traitor. Living with our mom, she couldn't see it any other way. She thought it was my fault for not keeping quiet. During all this, my dad remarried and I got a new stepmom. At first, it was awkward, but my stepmom tried really hard to be a good mother figure. Seeing her effort, I decided to embrace my new family and stepmom. I stopped reaching out to my sister, and over time, we completely lost touch. I didn't have any lingering feelings for my biological mom, who only loved my sister. I was able to go to college and get a job, focusing on my own future. Just when I thought I could finally repay my father and stepmother, my father passed away in an accident. Even though my sister and I had grown distant, I still informed her that our father, who was still her father too, had passed away. However, instead of offering any condolences, my sister responded by saying, "Serves him right," and laughed mockingly. I thought she might still come to the funeral, but neither my biological mother nor my sister showed up. Later, when we were discussing my father's inheritance, my biological mother and sister suddenly appeared. Everyone was shocked by their flashy and inappropriate clothing and heavy makeup. They were barely recognizable as the mother and sister I once knew, and I was surprised to see how much they enjoyed dressing so ostentatiously. They complained, "At least tell us the date for deciding the inheritance." We had to check every day because we didn't know when it would start. It turned out my mother had been keeping an eye on things, hoping to join the inheritance discussions. I thought she should have just shown up at the funeral instead, especially since the inheritance meeting was scheduled right after the funeral. My mother then said, "Because of what you said, my poor little daughter had to suffer. You're going to give us a fair share, right?" Even though they were divorced and living separately, I knew that children still have the right to inherit. I never intended to refuse that. My father's personal assets weren't that large, and I could earn my own money by working. My stepmother is still young enough to keep working, and she plans to do so for a while longer. So even if I gave my father's property to my biological mother, my stepmother wouldn't struggle financially. To avoid any further disputes, I decided to give up my claim to my father's inheritance. My mom insulted my dad, calling him stupid for making a big deal out of a simple affair and wanting a divorce. She said she agreed to the divorce because being with a small-minded man like him made her narrow-hearted too. My mom laughed and said it wasn't dad who dumped her, but she who dumped him for being stingy. My sister joined in, making fun of my dad and saying it was sad that I had to live with such a father. They both laughed cruelly, showing no understanding or empathy for the sadness and loss my father felt after being betrayed. I couldn't believe how they were treating my father's memory. I finally said, "You can say whatever you want about me, but please don't speak ill of our deceased father." But my sister snapped back, "What's the traitor saying? You're the root of all evil." Then they both started mocking my appearance, saying I looked older than my mom, and questioning my worth as a woman because they assumed I didn't have a boyfriend. After an intense argument, my mother and sister told me never to contact them again and stormed out. I didn't feel anger or disappointment, I just felt empty. In that moment, it was like they were erased from my life. After they left, the room fell silent until someone coughed, bringing me back to reality. We solemnly divided the inheritance. Years later, my stepmother inherited the house my father left, and I continued living there. I think she was thinking about me, even though I was an adult. My stepmother always tried to be a mother figure for me, and her support made me very happy. But then she became ill and was hospitalized. She apologized, saying, "I didn't ask you to live with me just so you could take care of me." I reassured her, "I know, but even if we lived separately, I would have taken care of you if you were hospitalized, so don't worry." I visited the hospital regularly to take care of my stepmother during my work breaks. I didn't want to have regrets like I did when my father was ill. It was important to me to spend as much time with her as possible since her time was limited. One man who had been supporting me throughout this was someone I had planned to marry. Just before we were about to get married, my stepmother's illness was discovered. I asked to postpone the wedding, but my partner felt it was important to support my stepmother. When I introduced him to her, he told her, "I'm looking forward to living together with the three of us." He was a wonderful person, and it meant a lot to my stepmother. She was so happy to see me in my wedding dress, and she lived longer than expected. However, she passed away a few days after my wedding, joining my father. She was wealthy, and I inherited a large amount of money. With her help, my husband and I were able to build a happy family. We decided from the start of our marriage to work and live within our means, not relying on the inheritance. One day at work, I received repeated calls from an unknown number on my cell phone. I thought it might be a sales call, so I didn't answer. Eventually, I answered and found out it was my sister, whom I had cut off. She was crying and asking why I hadn't come to our mother's funeral. I was confused because our mother had died 3 years ago, and we had already had a funeral. My sister then angrily said, "Maybe your stepmother died too." I'm talking about our real mother. Calling someone you're not even related to mother is disgusting. I was irritated but chose to ignore her. Losing her mother must have been very hard for her. To me, my real mother was my stepmother, who had married my father and become a mother to me when I was in middle school. I didn't fully understand this until I had a family of my own, but I appreciate the effort and care my stepmother put into raising me. Blood connections don't mean much compared to the love and dedication someone can show, like my stepmother did. My real mother, in my eyes, is the one who raised me, not the woman I was born to. Understanding my sister's words, I replied in a disinterested manner. I heard banging or stomping on the phone while my sister was talking. She complained about my indifferent attitude and criticized me for not attending our relative's funeral, calling me cold-blooded. Despite her criticism, she didn't attend our father's funeral either. Our father loved both of us equally, more than our mother did. My birth mother and sister not only missed my father's funeral, but also took his inheritance and spoke poorly of him. If anyone is lacking in empathy, it's them, not me. I told my sister that we were essentially strangers now and reminded her that she was the one who told me never to contact her again. I added that I would renounce all claim to the inheritance related to our mother, leaving it all to her. A few days later, my sister called again, asking for help. She said that our mother had hinted at marrying several men and was now being threatened with lawsuits for compensation. She seemed overwhelmed and asked for my help. I told her that she should just pay the compensation, but she said she couldn't afford it. She mentioned that the men were questionable and that there were many of them. I reminded her that she was the one who said not to contact her and that our mother was known for having multiple affairs, which was common knowledge. If our father had known about all her affairs, he might have been more understanding. I also mentioned that my father had tried to adopt my sister several times, but she didn't want to leave, so he eventually gave up on the idea. My sister wanted to stay with our irresponsible mother, even though she knew how bad things were. Despite seeing our mother's faults up close, she still chose to be with her, twisting our shared memories. I think it's wrong to stay in a toxic situation like that, even as an adult. I don't have any sympathy for her. I told my sister that she was the one who called me a traitor, and I didn't want a sister who sees me that way. I said I didn't need her pretending to be family now and that she should never contact me again. I hung up and blocked her number. Later, I got a call from my biological mother's relatives. They apologized for how my mother and sister had treated me. They were surprised that my mother tried to claim my father's inheritance, especially since we had been separated for a long time. The relatives also mentioned that my sister had turned out just like our mother, involving herself with bad men and getting into trouble. They had warned her many times, but she didn't listen and ended up in even worse situations, being forced into criminal activities. My sister was dating several men at once, which led to many big arguments. The relatives, who had warned her many times, decided to cut off the relationship with her if she didn't change her ways. After our mother died, they followed through with their decision. Shortly after the funeral, there was another big argument, and since then, my sister has gone missing. The relatives told me not to get involved with her anymore, and I had no plans to do so. I do feel a bit sorry for her because she ended up in criminal activities, but she should have found a better way to handle things. I decided it's her own fault if she didn't. After hanging up, I heard my husband and kids happily laughing in another room. I want to protect my family and live my life, using the mistakes of my biological mother and sister as lessons on what not to do.